uh, Interrogations. I am Kevin Karpiak, Assistant Professor of Criminology and Anthropology at Eastern Michigan University, and also General Editor of the Anthropoloteia suite of websites. And I am so happy today to be here with Dr. Lynn Bolles to talk about some of the actions that have come out of the American Anthropological Association's latest general meetings concerning police violence and racism. So I'll let Dr. Bolles introduce herself today.
Okay. As Kevin has just said, I'm Lynn Bolles. I'm a professor of women's studies and affiliate faculty in anthropology, African American studies, comp Latin American studies, with a little Latin American studies thrown in. I guess more importantly, I'm on the executive board, member of the executive board of the American Anthropological Association. I am not speaking on behalf of them at all, but I just want to, but the actions of the board and things that the AAA president, Monica Heller, have done in the past couple of weeks, I think are really a momentous occasion for anthropology. So making a stand, she made a major public stand that was, some of us might say that was very guarded, but we have to remember that she is representing a professional organization. But when she says, as anthropologists who are concerned with the human condition and understanding inequality, that in fact we have to talk about state violence. I mean, so that was a major coup. I mean, that was a major I think knowing some of the people who have come before her who would never have made that kind of a statement ever. We just even have to think back, 30 years ago, when Margaret Mead didn't think that anthropologists should be talking about the Vietnam War. So I mean, so I think we should be very as much, and particularly given the history of anthropology. Our work was used in all kinds of ways. Some of it knowingly. I think of the Brits in Africa, the Americans on reservations amongst Native Americans. I mean, we've been informants. We have done the Rand Corporation. I mean, there's been things done in terms of being an objective scientist, I think for us saying, okay, we're removing the veil. And some of us are stepping out, and so that I think is an important thing.
Great. I'm happy that you framed some of our conversation today, I think, by situating both what was happening at the anthropology meetings within anthropology's larger history of these problems, not kind of outside these problems, but within these problems. So hopefully we'll get to some of that in a second.
Okay.
First, I just wanted, because many people, including myself, may not be aware. So I became aware of the events just through kind of word of mouth on Twitter and things like that there's going to be a die-in. But could you maybe walk me through a little bit just how those events kind of came about?
Sure. And actually, I really want to credit Carol McCanahan, who's at University of Colorado, Boulder, who and
also at Savage Minds blog.
Exactly. Well, it all started with it really started with Savage Minds, which is what she is all about as a human rights activist. Okay, / anthropologist / whatever. I mean, so as soon as the indictment came down in Missouri, she contacted a number of us. And gave us this extraordinarily short deadline, like, can you write this in like the next couple hours? And this was, Thanksgiving, and I'm a traditionalist, so I'm baking, so when I said, okay, hold on, let me put the pies in the oven and see what I can do. And so in the meantime, Lee Baker from Duke, Whitney Batiste Battle rather from UMass Amherst, who is an archaeologist. Augustin Fuentes, and I think one other person who I cannot remember, unfortunately. We are on that blog. We were on Savage Minds 2 days after the indictment came down. And so it was really important that, it was really kudos to Carol for getting us going. So we put this up, Carol put it up, and on Thanksgiving Day, Monica Heller, she goes, I forgot that it's a U.S. holiday because she's Canadian. Their Thanksgiving is, I think in October, and she says, what can we do? What can the AAA do? And so
Monica got in touch with you, having seen the Savage Minds blog.
After seeing the Savage Minds,
wow.
She reads extensively. So she evidently reads Savage Minds, and she liked what we all had to say, and couching it particularly. Lee couched it in the history of anthropology. Whitney talked about it in terms of her classroom and her work as an archaeologist. What do we say about the past? How do we move forward? We have to think about what we think, and then because I can't remember it all, but one of the things that I was trying to get people to what kind of activism they needed to do. As anthropologists, as citizens, as people who care about the human condition, who are concerned about the growing inequality and the inability of the law of the land to work on behalf of all people.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, we got Monica put me in touch with Rachel Watkins and Mary Gray, who were the program chairs, and what can we do in this very tight, very large program? Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, Victoria Massey, who is a graduate student at Berkeley, is saying, what are we going to do? And we must do something. And so, in fact, she becomes kind of the younger voice of all of this. And so it's within her connections that we have another set of voices coming into the conversation. And then I said, well, we can't do anything without SANA. We can't, the Society for the Anthropology of North America, we cannot do this without ALA, the Association of Latino and Latino Association, and we certainly cannot do this without the Association of Black Anthropologists. And then bring in SUNTA, bring in other AQA, other kind of progressive forces in the AAA, who in fact many of them are activists. Many of them had been part of Occupy Wall Street. They have been, the old guard have been, marching in the Vietnam War. So all of this came to, we were able to get the 2 meeting sites, space in the program. The first one, which I could not attend, and so David Simmons, who's the incoming president of the ABA, working with Marla Frederick, who's at that time was the current ABA president. We just, and with Catherine Kingfisher, they put in conversation. We got the room. We got an agenda of what we were going to do the first time around on Thursday. What can we as anthropologists do? How do we take the forces of what we do best, which is to write, to participate, to observe, to record, to give voice and understanding to these communities who are engaged in this. And so then with Bianca Williams and of course Lynn Bolles, we were able to get the Marriott Wardman to let us do this die-in. And when you have to think about who and what the Marriott is, conservative, and what Monica Heller was able to do was saying, well, you know, we are social scientists, and we are concerned about certain issues. This will be as peaceful. We do participant observation. But we are also engaged scholars. And then she convinced these folks. They said, well, the only thing you could not do was block registration, and you couldn't block the doors. And so this is how the die-in happened. And so it was serious word of mouth. Serious word of mouth.
It really was, yeah.
And then you have this, and some of the photos you can't really see, but when I see, and it was right at the same time where the daycare had a break, and so there were lots of little people. There were like toddlers and babies in carriages, and as well as I say, people who had marched in anti-war demonstrations in 1966. Who had been part of the anti-apartheid movement, from all of these kind of older senior anthropologists who were saying, okay, when is the die-in? What's happening? Where are we supposed to go? And their thing was, I think I can go get down. I'm not sure if I can get back up. But so you had this, and I thought it was really important that the little people, I mean, when I say little people, I'm talking about the tiny people, you would think a toddler was going to be running around. There wasn't one baby cry. There was not one. It was like, okay, we're going to lie down, and this is really important. And, a 2-year-old said, okay. So it was multi-generational. It was, I think, a very significant, not only outpouring of support for all of these activities, for Eric Garner, all of this, as well as for just the increased state violence. And then, of course, then you had Robin Kelly's piece that documented what is over 100 Black and brown people, men who in fact had been killed by police, whose in fact indictments came out the same way. So it wasn't just an isolated, and we forget about, Trayvon Martin. I mean, talk about, miscarriage of justice. So I think it was an important time, and when we met on Saturday, when we broke into groups, it really, I think, really showed how important people were about getting this work done, particularly doing the work. I think about 15 different communities were identified where anthropologists who live in those communities were going to do the research or have conversations with people involved in those activities.
Okay.
You know, and then the stuff that happened the other day with somewhat from what we are told, unstable person who took some of the language that was being used and took it literally. And that you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you can't control, it's just as you can't control a police officer who's not well trained. You can't control someone who has a history of being perhaps subjected to state violence, but who also has taken that as a personal issue and decided to not to the violence, take the violence in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, so that you can't control that.
Mm-hmm.
Cannot control what individuals will do.
Mm-hmm. And it's part of what's scary is it's now being used in this kind of reactive way against any kind of idea of police reform.
Exactly.
That if you're for any kind of police reform, then you're for also killing police officers somehow.
Exactly, and that in fact, and one of the things that I said in the blog I wrote for Savage Minds, that we do know there are some really significant, righteous, really important people in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. Really, I mean, these are the people you really want on your side. And then we know there's some people, you know, who aren't. So, you know, how do we know the difference? Well, we only can see their actions. And so now we have identified a couple of them who've become, you know, national figures, good and, you know, on the, from our perspective, you know, people who really took the law in their own hands, or were not trained well, or whatever the excuse is, and then someone who went rogue.
Mm-hmm.
Who went rogue. I mean, you can't control that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it's also complicated because many of us at the Anthropoloteia blog, we've expanded kind of our purview as a blog, but many of the kind of the core founders of the blog are all anthropologists studying police. Right. And so, including myself, I study French policing, but one of the confusing things for me talking with American police, and especially some of my more sociological colleagues who inhabit the role maybe more than anthropologists do, that they especially in Darren Wilson, it's been very interesting that they refuse to call him actually a rogue. You know, in a way, they specifically the Darren Wilson case. What's odd about it, and what's troubling about it, and maybe more deeply troubling about it, is that in a way that was how it was supposed to go.
Yeah.
And if you hear the prosecutor, like he's recounting this as if he thinks this is how something should go, and you know other listeners, including myself, are hearing the same set of facts and saying, "Well, this is horrible and messed up." but that's but I guess that's leading into the next place I wanted to go from the AAAs is kind of what we as anthropologists can be doing about the kind of the people who are probably interested in our blog, anthropologists interested in studying police and studying security officers and studying prison officers and things like that. Where do you think we can go with this now?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I know that the ABA and SANA wanted to do, and I know this is going to happen at the SANA meetings in which are going to be held at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So very appropriate. But I know that that's part of on the agenda. And one of the things that I know here at the I'm at the University of Maryland, which has one of the most, from what I understand, this is what they tell me, that it has one of the most effective, prestigious criminal justice programs in the country. If you are a good student as an undergraduate, the DEA, FBI has got you. If you have multiple languages, the CIA has already identified you, and they churn these people out. It's one of the most popular degrees to get, and some of the
university as well, and my own university as well. Yes.
So so you can get a PhD in criminal justice at University of Maryland, and be a top cop. And what happens in how those students are, not only it's that kind of sociological look at looking at criminality as a deviant activity, but the emphasis is always on the not on the policing, but on those who are policed.
Policed, absolutely.
So when I finally do have criminal justice majors in my class, they're going, oh, this is really different than what I'm getting in my major. And I said, I'm glad you're taking my class, because how are we going to deal with immigration? How are we going to live with some of the, the major issues that have now been informed, because ICE and Homeland Security are, part of, are also associated with the Department of Justice. But getting back with
can you give me an example of how your sense of how your class is different than some of these other classes they might be taking?
Well, I mean, one of the basics, I'm in women's studies, okay, and my courses are most often cross-listed with either American studies or African American studies. I don't have one course ever cross-list yet in anthropology. But I get now and then I have anthropology graduate students.
Okay.
And now and then I'll have an anthropology undergrad. But one of the, my courses are based on by the subject matter that which I teach, which is almost this premise of miseducation. So let me tell you what the real deal is. So when I just finished teaching a course called Caribbean Women, so I said we have to go back and understand, because in fact, since many of you, if all of you, meaning the classroom, unless you are of Caribbean descent, you don't know anything about this other place in the world. It's a place that your cruise ship stops by. It's a place you want to go on your vacation to, not some. And real people live there. Yes, you might get a Jamaican patty, but you don't know why it's what it is. So, and then we talk about, of course, differences in inequality. How inequality looks different in other places. What do you do with a majority black society where inequality is just as severe as it is in the United States? This throws them for a loop. Well, they're all black, yeah, but this is a black country. So how else we are divided? What are the means for this stratification? So this gives them an idea to think differently about the United States, as well as to have a different lens, because many of them would have not have taken anthropology. And since anthropology does not talk about stratification or inequality, unless you're talking about indigenous people, and I take it back, because people who do medical anthropology in my department, people who do environmental justice, environmentals are really concerned of how farmers are dealt with. I mean, so it's hidden. It's not on the forefront. And I think, and just me standing up there, it's a different kind of classroom. It's a different kind of classroom.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is kind of one of the ways that one of the things anthropology can bring to a situation like we're trying to deal with now with the post Ferguson, the post Eric Gardner, and now forward era is really bring a sense of kind of the comparative perspective on how power and inequality and stratification works, and really think about policing as a mechanism for that.
Absolutely. We can even in graduate education, we can think about how we have been trained to understand the levels of organization. We have our hunters and gatherers, and then we have our this, and then we have our that. And one of the things that we do talk about is in this, as people become more complicated in their spaces, there's more than just there becomes a hierarchy. Who maintains that hierarchy? Now we'll talk about tribute, but we don't talk about who enforces the tribute. We just kind of gloss over that, because we're really still looking at the religious specialists. We're still looking at the king or whatever, the chief. We're not talking about how his or her domain is controlled.
So part of also what's at stake is what I'm hearing you say is not just what anthropology can bring to this conversation, but how this conversation changes what we do in anthropology.
Yeah, I mean, we have.
And I think there are various anthropologies out there today. My own kind of, I guess the people I was hanging with in my programs were studying more kind of scientists and things like that coming out of Berkeley. We do a lot of that. But still, this issue of how to think about and how to study power in an explicit way is choppy at best.
Right, and I don't want to give. Anthropologists have been doing this since day one. Okay, we didn't need Foucault to tell us about agency and power. Okay. We had been talking about it from the very beginnings. We just didn't put it in the hands of we denied it for groups of people in the dark ages, like the 19th century, and by the 20th century, 20s and 30s. There certainly was, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I mean, we talked about this, Elsie Parson Cruz. I mean, she talked about this in 1923. so it's and you know, Hugh Smythe and all these, you know, people who've came. It's just who got in the position to talk about it. That the accent, the emphasis has made it move forward into the 80s and 90s, where in fact it had been going along all, you know, all the time. It's just how fashionable it got to be, or not fashionable, or what the emphasis was. And I think that's, you know, and then we have these, you know, then we have the positivists. You know, it's only in the past 20 years that the positive, I can't even say this straight, have had kind of taken a back seat. I mean, it's really important to understand that, in fact, it was so much work was denied or eroded or dismissed was because of this of we must be objective, we must be X, Y, and Z, and that really took a toll, I think, on the kind of work that we do now. Now we just said, oh well, you know, this is not. I take a position, I take a stand. I am as objective as I can be, versus I am an objective social scientist, and I think the sociologists are just coming to grips with that as they start valuing our methods of doing work.
And maybe one day criminologists will too.
Well, you know, that's the thing.
Very little sign of that, though.
Right.
Some sign, but very little. But why do you think that's important, again, for thinking about what we're talking about today? Because my sense is, along with you, that it actually really is. To have a sense of kind of when talking about issues of police and violence and race is absolutely essential in a way that I agree with you. I don't think some of the other disciplines necessarily capture, but I'm not sure if I can articulate exactly why. Do you have a sense of why that's so important to you?
The significance of race in this.
Well, but also of understanding one's situatedness when talking about those things.
Well, I mean, part of it is that we've separated, and I think this is, I think this is what that has, you know, and now we have another handle on this post-racial. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Bull Connor doesn't exist anymore, but of course Bull Connor is alive and well in the minds of all kinds of people. But it's not overt, and it's and what makes people who live in very policed areas, and supposedly for their own safety, also know that they are subjected to the kind of policing that we can't, that you and I cannot imagine. Whether we live in garrison communities, whether we live in ghettos, whether we live in whatever, and those who live in gated communities who erect barbed wire on top of their cut glass to keep the intruders out, that also says something about who has been demonized, and those are the kinds of things that anthropologists who, in fact, work outside of the United States I think, are grappling with. I think those who live in the United States understand it very well because that's the kind of work that they're doing. But I think it's something that we we don't take it for granted, and I'm just going to say I really don't. I in one instance much of the sociology that I see about this really doesn't go into the why, but only the how it happens. And so when you are, and the kind of work that we do, of this on-the-ground kind of work, and I think of people such as Betty Lou Valentine, who we just lost last year, who did that monumental work on hustling and other hard work. I mean, she talked about when she did that research in the 1970s, this community of wherever it was located, someplace in the Midwest, where in fact the police weren't their friends. And neither were the social services, either, because they had this mindset that they weren't really human. You know, they were, and so how does that happen? How do we get generations of people across class who, in fact, demonize? I think of at least some of the transcript that I read from that indictment, where in fact Darren Walker was talking about, oh, I felt like I was a little 5-year-old boy. Well, he and Mike Brown were the same size. They were huge men. They were, you know, okay, one was perhaps a little better shape, but they both were 6'5", okay? They weighed, you know, 250, 130, 300. So why does he see himself as a little 5-year-old boy? You know, and so that tells you about them becoming a monster that has nothing to do with your physical size, but it demonizes the person who in fact becomes the monster black male. Which, you know, it's okay that you lie dead on the ground for 4.5 minutes. It's okay that when you say I can't breathe, and you're surrounded by people who know exactly how to give you CPR.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, they've been trained. You know, how did you do it? You know, and watch you just die.
Mm-hmm.
Because you were a monster on the ground. You know, it's like we have these epithets. You know, the only good red, you know, the only good Indian is, you know, a dead one. I mean, this is part of our ideology. So how do you undo this? And so by the time you get into the police academy, or you get to go to Quantico, you know, it's hardcore. You have to work on that. You know, so, you know, and it can't be, oh, my best friend in high school was, you know, the guy I played football with, and, you know, he was a nice guy. You know, no, that, you know, that's because that's the exceptionalism that people fall back on. Now, you know, she treated me like her own child. You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There are so many places I want to go with that. One last question, then we probably need to start wrapping up. But just, I mean, part of what's, again, so difficult how to deal with for someone who's trying to understand police as a human life form, right? Is that some of the same things that to me, if someone's saying I can't breathe, like, back up, let them breathe. But some of the observation could be taken so many different ways, and so that for many police officers, that the fact that he could say I can't breathe meant that he could breathe, and so that meant that he was lying, which meant that he needed to be punished more. right? This is the
Right.
weird circular, the weird, very different places one could go from the same kind of, observation about the world. And I think there's something that to grapple with there, but I think anthropology could help in a lot of ways, if only we're in a way that we're still trying to figure out. I think a little bit, but um, I guess that's where I want to wrap up today is that going forward, if you have any suggestions or advice or visions for kind of coming out of the AAA meetings with the die-in and with the executive board meetings with the statements by President Heller, I know that there's some syllabi on how to teach around these issues. If you have any other suggestions about how we might go forward coming out of where we've been so far.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. One, there will be further discussion. Well, there must be further discussion, and I believe that the meetings next year in Denver will recognize that.
Okay. So there's already kind of things planned for the agenda for next year.
Yeah, I know that work is being done. In our groupings, that was one of the groups' mission was to, okay, how do we do this? Do we use executive, such as we did about the Israeli-Palestine issue, where in fact the AAA just said, we don't want to be like the MLA or the ASA. We want to have discussion. We want to have dialogue. Why does this matter to us? And I thought that was absolutely brilliant on the way that was handled. That, in fact, embedded in next year's meeting should be a reporting back of what this research on the ground that this group, who are going to be in these, I think, 15 different communities, what they were able to do. Working with people who are doing this kind of activist work. Who are they? Who do they represent? Represent meaning the 20-year-old out of unemployment, unemployed youth. Those, that's what I meant representing, not because they're members of Al Sharpton's group but who they are in vis-a-vis their own community, or are they just visitors? Who are the anarchists amongst them? How in fact does how people get engaged, how they get brought to these kinds of issues? What brought them to the saying, I have to speak out? It doesn't impact me, but it matters to me. What kind of world do I want to live in? I'm only 25 years old. I'm only 24 years old. I'm only 18. I have only known policing and war. Okay, so what does that mean? So I think that will be important just in terms of getting a handle on what's going on, not only in the United States, but this is stuff going on across the world. We have to think about that too. I think of the alienation that is bringing Islamic youth, bringing them to ISIS. What makes this militarism so in the name of religious feelings? Why are they doing that? And then why, in fact, are they doing kind of like 12th century policing? Okay. and or 11th century. So that's part of it. The executive board definitely is pushing with letters to the Department of Justice, to Homeland Security. I mean, so it's doing its job. The thing is not to have this work that is so important now become yesterday's news. And I think, given our own work with the Race Project, that we can continue this, because race does matter. And if we take this along with the new project on immigration, that, this is because, in fact, we're focusing on African Americans, and we're focusing less on our brown brothers and sisters, who, in fact, in other parts of the United States are policed just as heavily. And on top of that, they've got Homeland Security about the deportation issues. So, I mean, so all of this, and then what happens with M13, and what happens when people are sent back to Guatemala or Honduras, in fact, and terrorize their own people. And the inability of, and they police the police. And so, we have lots of things to what's going on in Chechnya, what's on in the Ukraine, all of these, we can use what's going on here in so many different ways of why, in fact, in this era of hyper-globalization, in fact, where policing and control of a certain factor is critical. Maintain and control all of us.
So the kind of the role of policing globally, and the
absolutely, it's
reliance on it as a form of government.
Exactly, and how, in fact, governments who can't control, and for all kinds of reasons, with corruption, it's this, that, and the other, it's yeah.
So there's kind of several kind of trajectories, as you thought. There's the kind of organizing trajectory, there's the pedagogical trajectory, and there's the research trajectory that I hear you saying, that there's kind of,
and it all is tied into the same situation, and I think that's the only way to go. And I think and in fact, that's what we do. That's what we do.
Good. Well, that sounds like a good place to end this interview. For participating in it, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Okay, take care.
You too.